everybody. My name is Dana Leffenberg. I'm the town supervisor in the town of Ossining, for those of you who have not had the opportunity to meet me before. And welcome to our town board regular meeting and town hall meeting for Tuesday, November 14th, 2017. Please rise and join me for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
You kind of have a split. Our town clerk is on the other side. So, Madam Rowe.
Councilmember DeTore. Present. Councilmember Jeffrey. Present. Councilmember Wilshire.
Present.
Councilmember Feldman. Present. And Supervisor Levenberg.
Here.
Do we have any announcements?
I have some brief announcements, and I will be brief, since we have a big crowd here for the presentation, but I wanted to be sure to remind everybody of a few specific events. Right here in this very theater, the Ossining Documentary and Discussion Series will host a screening of The Mask You Live In this Thursday, November 16th, beginning at 6:30 p.m. The film, which explores our culture's definitions of masculinity and how it affects our adolescent and teen boys, will be followed by a panel discussion that you won't want to miss. Be sure to get here early, as parking can be tight. I also want to remind everyone that tomorrow, Wednesday, November 15th, is America Recycles Day. Both the town and village of Ossining and the village of Briarcliff do a fantastic job of diverting much of our trash stream into recycling instead of solid waste. And we hopefully will be doing even more of that in the town in 2018 if we get a chance to implement our food scrap program and some other great initiatives that our friends at Green Ossining have brought to our attention. I hope that you'll visit americarecyclesday.org to take the pledge to make this community and our global community healthier, greener, and more sustainable. And this Saturday night marks opening night for Westchester Collaborative Theater's 4 weeks of 4 one-act plays performed on Water Street at their theater. Tickets and more information are available at wctheater.org. Finally, the town board will not be meeting next week, and town offices will be closed on Thursday, November 23rd and Friday, November 24th for the Thanksgiving holiday. I wish everyone a happy and healthy holiday, surrounded by family and friends and neighbors very closely. And we will see you for our next regular meeting on Tuesday, November 28th at the courthouse. And that is it for my announcements. Do any of my colleagues have any announcements? Anything that they would like to add? No, thank you. There are no liaison reports. Oh, I'm sorry.
Sorry, I'll be really quick. Last night, the Ossining Parks and Recreation Advisory Board met. We've discussed various things, including the ongoing search for a village superintendent of Park and Rec. That if anybody out there knows anybody who might be interested in that position, the village is very actively seeking somebody who's going to be both practical and imaginative and be able to bring that rec center to the next level. They have extended that search beyond Westchester County into the state of New York. The thought process is that maybe somebody from a neighboring county might be interested. We don't know whether somebody from way up in the state would want to, but we're looking for everywhere. So that's one of the things they're looking at. They're also talking about varying things having to do with the parks and how to enhance. The town has stated that it's going to provide the capital plan that we have to the Parks and Rec Advisory so that they can utilize that information in conjunction with the suggestions that they have.
Any other liaison reports?
Okay, just a brief announcement that the Ossining Boat and Canoe Club is doing the Ossining Boat and Canoe Club toy drive for Toys for Ossining Children starting in the next week or so. So if anybody would like to place a box at their business, give us a call and help, or just have a home party and collect toys for the kids of Ossining, just reach out to the Ossining Boat and Canoe Club or me, and we'll be happy to take the offering. Thank you.
Are there any seats that are available that have not been identified? If there's a seat near you, could you raise your hand? There's one up here still left. Is that it? Everybody else? Okay, thank you for your patience and understanding. And we are sorry that we didn't find a larger venue. This usually does contain all of the interested parties for our town hall meetings and beyond. We know this is an interesting topic, but we didn't know quite how many people would be here tonight, so we apologize for that.
Okay, move on to agenda items. Is there anyone who would like to comment on any of the agenda items this evening? And please be advised there is a 3-minute opportunity to address There is a 3-minute time limit for anyone to comment on any of the agenda items that are on this evening's agenda.
Again, this is the agenda for this special meeting, so this is not, we're not looking for the comments on Homestead at this point, because that's not on our agenda for a special meeting.
Move on to resolutions. Resolved that the town board of the town of Ossining hereby approves the October 24th, 2017 minutes of the regular meeting as presented.
Do I have a motion? Okay, all those in favor? Aye. Opposed?
Resolved the town board of the town of Ossining. Resolved the town board of the town of Ossining hereby approves the November 8th, 2017 minutes of the special meeting as presented.
Do I have a motion? All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Thank you.
Resolved the town board of the town of Ossining hereby approves the voucher detail report dated November 14th, 2017, the amount of $196,819.96.
Do I have a motion? Discussion? All those in favor? Aye. Opposed?
Resolved the town board of the town of Ossining hereby calls for a public hearing to be held on Tuesday, November 28th, 2017 at 7:30 p.m. at the Birdsall Fagan Police Court Facility, 8688 Spring Street, Ossining, New York, in the matter of the 2018 preliminary budget with the town of Ossining.
Do I have a motion? So we've been working hard to come up with a preliminary budget, and we have additional meetings with our departments this Friday from 1 o'clock on, and we hope to have everything in place to present at the public hearing on November 28th, and we're calling for that now. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed?
Resolved the town board of the town of Ossining hereby authorizes the supervisor to execute an intermunicipal agreement with the village of Ossining with a term effective April 1, 2017 through March 31st, 2018 for the village to provide yard waste transfer services for the town in accordance with said IMA, subject to the approval of council to the town as formed.
Do I have a motion? Madam Clerk, could you please move the microphone a little closer to your mouth? Mary Ann?
Yes,
Could you, okay, thank you. Okay, so this is the intermunicipal agreement regarding the yard waste transfer, which we discussed at our work session. We discussed this in detail, that we're trying to get, make sure that the pass-through costs from the county are covered by the town when we pay the village to take care of our yard waste. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed?
Whereas a written petition dated November 6, 2017, in due form and containing the required signature, has been presented by Angel Quintantuno to the town board of the town of Ossining, Westchester County, New York, for the extension of the Ossining Consolidated Sewer District in said town, and where said premises are known as 93 Old Albany Post Road, Ossining, New York, and also known as Section 80.10-1-35 on the tax map of the town of Ossining, and whereas the improvements proposed for said sewer district extension consists of construction and installation of a sewer system, including sewer main, manhole, and other improvements incidental thereto, all as more described in the map and plan accompanying the aforementioned petition, which map and plan are on file in the town clerk's office of of said town for public inspection during regular business hours, and whereas the cost of establishing such a sewer district extension shall be borne entirely by the petitioner, and where it is now desired to call a public hearing to consider the petition for the proposed establishment of said sewer district extension pursuant to section 193 of the town law, as well as for purposes of determining the environmental impact of said action. Now therefore be it reported by the town board of the town of Boston, Westchester County, New York as follows. Section 1. A meeting of the town board of the town of Boston, Westchester County, New York shall be held at the police court facility, 8688 Spring Street, in Austin, New York, on the 28th day of November at 7:35 p.m. for the purpose of conducting a public hearing to consider the aforementioned petition and to hear all persons interested in the subject thereof concerning the same. Section 2, the town clerk is hereby authorized and directed to cause a certified copy of this order to be published in the Gazette and posted in the manner provided by law. And 3, Section 3, this order shall take effect immediately.
Do I have a motion?
Second.
Okay. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed?
Whereas the town of Austin owns Cedar Lane Park, which is the location of the Rubin House, a vacant residential building with potential for future commercial investment, and whereas the Rubin House requires extensive deconstruction and rehabilitation to be operational, and whereas Empire State Development is offering funding for the demolition, deconstruction, and/or rehabilitation, reconstruction of vacant buildings through the Restore New York Grant Program, and whereas the town is interested in seeking funding under the Restore New York Program to undergo necessary deconstruction and rehabilitation work on the Rubin House to facilitate future investment in this property. Resolved that the town board of the town of Austin hereby calls for a public hearing to be held on Tuesday, November 28, 2017, at 7:30 p.m. at the Birdsall Fagan Police Court Facility, 8688 Spring Street, Austin, New York, in the matter of the Restore New York grant application for the deconstruction and rehabilitation of the Rubin House, Cedar Lane Park, 235 Cedar Lane, Austin, New York.
Do I have a motion? Oh.
Be it further resolved that the town clerk is hereby directed to publish the property assessment list, which indicates restoration phases of the Rubin House in the Journal News for 3 consecutive days as required by the Restore New York grant guidelines. The town of Austin is seeking funding from the Empire State Development Corporation's Restore New York program for property located at 235 Cedar Lane for a project entitled Rubin House Restoration.
Do I have a motion? Do I have a second? Second. Thank you. So this is, unfortunately, that we have some very tight deadlines to meet for this grant opportunity to apply for the grant to take a look at a building that is in severe disrepair in one of our town parks. And what we're seeking is funding to basically take the building down and then prepare it for future something. Future something has yet to be determined. We would have plans to work with a contractor that would do their best to maintain whatever salvageable elements of the building we could. And that's what we're having a public hearing to just basically hear a little bit about what the plans would be to, if we were to get funding to deconstruct and prepare it for future rehabilitation. It's called rehabilitation under the grant guidelines. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Thank you.
We have no correspondence to be received and filed. However, we do have monthly reports. Resolved that the town board of the town of Austin hereby accepts the following monthly reports. Town Building Department, Town Clerk's Office, GE Helicopter reports for July, August, and September of 2017, Town Tax Receiver's Office, and the Town Supervisor's Office.
Do I have a motion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. All right.
We'll move on to visitor recognition. Visitors shall be accorded 1 3-minute opportunity to speak.
Again, I would ask folks with comments or questions about any of the town hall media material, if you you could hold off until after the presentation. However, I cannot require it, so if anybody wants to make a comment during this section of visitor recognition, you may.
Not seeing anyone, may I have a motion for an adjournment into the town hall meeting?
All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Thank you. Okay, so thank you everybody for your patience. And I would like to welcome tonight Dr. Gerald Benjamin and Mr. Thomas Citrino from the Benjamin Center at SUNY New Paltz, along with Mr. John Wollam from the New York State Office of Real Property Tax Services and our tax assessor Fernando Gonzalez. As you may know, a group of private citizens calling themselves citizens of the town of Ossining for fair taxation prepared and distributed a mailer encouraging residents of Ossining to reach out to the town board and ask the board to implement the homestead option. For those unfamiliar with homestead, you will hear a lot more about it from these scholars shortly. Homestead is a tax policy option that would essentially allow the town to classify condominium units as if they were single-family homes, which would, among other things, likely raise the tax burden for owners of condos, while also shifting the entire burden of the commercial sector and reducing potentially, to some extent, the tax burden on single-family homeowners, as well as others that are in the residential class. The board invited Dr. Benjamin and Mr. Citrino from SUNY New Paltz to speak with us after reading their work about the city of Kingston, which implemented the homestead option back in 1989. The town website has actually linked to this study and associated documents several times over the course of the revaluation process, which began in 2015. Combined, the 3 documents regarding their work, the study and 2 articles, have had more than 4,000 hits on our website. Tonight we will hear directly from these scholars about their findings regarding the impact homestead has had around the state of New York. You may also remember Mr. Wollam from prior meetings, along with our town assessor Fernando Gonzalez, who will be here to answer your questions. I want to remind everyone that we must leave this building by 9:15 p.m. at the very latest. As we anticipate many of you having comments and questions, we have a sign-up list at the front for folks who want to speak, and we will refer to that list at the end of the presentation with the remaining time. I would also ask that you write your comments and questions down on the index cards. I don't know if those have been passed out, but we can pass out index cards. I'm hoping that we have those. Yes, okay. So if you have a question that comes up during the presentation, preferably instead of yelling out, you can write your questions down and then politely can come up to the microphone if you haven't signed up at the end of that sign-up period. And if we still have plenty of time to hear your questions, we will take the questions in the order that you come up. And then we will also put together an FAQ on the town website to address answers to the questions as they come. And I think that's it. So Jerry and Tom, you have the floor. Welcome, and thank you so much for coming tonight.
They're going up to the...
Good evening. Tell me if you can hear me. No.
Excuse me, I'm sorry.
Okay, good evening. My name is Gerald Benjamin. I'm here from, at the invitation of the board, as you heard, from SUNY New Paltz. The State University is pleased to provide services to our Hudson Valley communities, and our job at my center is to do public policy research and inform decision-making in local government in the region. We're happy to be here. We're not here with a study on Ossining. We haven't been commissioned to do a study on Ossining. We're here with a study on this subject, and based upon an earlier study that we did in the city of Kingston that was financed by a foundation because of concerns about the homestead option that was adopted at the City of Kingston. So I'm going to tell you, I'm going to talk to you about the history of this option, the consequences of choosing it, the process of choosing it, the consequences of choosing it. And Tom is going to talk to you about what we found in Kingston and the comparative information we have for other communities. We are not, I want to just, the disclaimer is that we have not undertaken a study of this community, and that would require us to do far more than we've been able to do in the short time since we were invited here. We would be happy to do that if the community desired it. I'm also, have to say that I'm an admirer of the town supervisors, who is, I think, an extraordinary public servant. She's helped us create and establish our center, and I've been very grateful for her support over the years, so thank you very much for that.
So it's totally unbiased.
We're going to try to go with reasonable dispatch so you have a chance to ask questions. So if you think that I'm going too fast, just slow me down. Just say something. Go slower. I've been teaching for 50 years, so I can get a sense of whether the people in the audience have spaced out or not. Usually with undergraduates, it happens in 12 minutes. How we got here, the Hellestein in the 1981 change in the real property tax law. Essentially, the Court of Appeals of New York State made a decision in 1975 that required assessors to assess real property at full value. Before then, businesses were generally overassessed and homes were generally underassessed. The consequence of full value assessment, political consequence, was terrifying to the New York State legislature because it would cause a great uproar among real property homeowners and consequently perhaps resulted in their losing their job. So Chapter 1057 of the laws of 1981 were enacted over the veto of the governor that was enacted to allow partial value assessment to continue and avoid redistribution. Also in 1981, the law provided the option of homestead, non-homestead classification of property for taxation over upstate jurisdiction. So we're dealing with adjustments to the practice of assessment in New York made for political reasons against the risk of taxpayer rising against the real property tax. A homestead option is available to municipal government when it conducts a reval, as you all know in this community know. And if the local government applies timely to obtain a certification as an approved assessing unit, the local government adopts the necessary local law. The assessment method chosen by the town of Ossining must also be used by the village of Ossining if this step is taken. The town must notify a potentially impacted school district if it adopts the homestead option. This is very important because the school district may be contained in the town or be only partly within the town. And if it's partly within the town, there are important implications. We'll talk about that further. The school district may adopt the homestead system if 1/5 of the parcels within it are also within an assessing jurisdiction using that system. So you have two school districts. We inquired and found that you had two school districts in this circumstance. If the town ceases to use the homestead system, if I do this, you can hear it better. I was warned of this. It was alleged that I was soft-spoken. That is not true. I'm just lazy. I can't keep the mic near my mouth. If the town ceases to use the homestead system, the school district may no longer use it. So the school district's use of the system is contingent on the town's choice. Before the homestead adoption, there is one tax base for the community. This is sometimes called the shares of the pie approach. One pie, one tax base, one tax rate. After adoption of homestead, there are two pieces of the pie, and there are separate rates for the residential property and the homestead property and the non-homestead property. So properties have to be allocated to one share of the other of the pie. Think about the pie, one share of the other. How are you going to cut the pie? Locality must reassess to establish an overall base. Properties are allocated to the homestead and non-homestead categories. Each of the two categories must pay the same proportion as was its share of the pie in the year before the reassessment occurred. So the share of the pie stays constant over time, once it's established. There's no initial shift in the tax burden as the result of reassessment, as feared from business property to homeowners under the share of the pie approach. The idea is to avoid the shift in the burden. That's the reason for the option. So before and after. The pie grows or shrinks with the overall market value of real estate in the community. We use the term city here. I should have fixed that in the slide. It should say town. After the pie is divided, each piece may grow or shrink at a different rate. That is, the value of the commercial property could rise at one rate, and the value of the residential property aggregated could rise at another rate, and usually does. Because the market for real commercial property and residential property differs in the same community. Each share of the pie must pay a consistent portion of the tax levy. Dividing the pie itself may affect the rate of growth. Different rate of growth shift the tax burden to the slower growing portion. This should be, it depends on how good you are at math if you can envision this, but if one part grows a lot, then it can bear its portion with a lower rate. If the other part grows less quickly, it bears has to have a higher rate to bear its portion. The homestead, non-homestead option does not change how much the town needs. The town's requirements are established by the town board. The homestead, non-homestead option changes how the town gets what it needs. John.
Good evening, everyone. Okay, I think this is working. I just wanted to add a couple of points to what Dr. Benjamin is saying about homestead. Dr. Benjamin, in an earlier slide, made note of school districts. Homestead is authorized by something known as Article 19, but there are actually two different kinds of homestead within the law. There's one set of homestead under 1903, which governs towns or cities and any taxing jurisdiction wholly contained therein. And then there's 1903A, which deals with taxing jurisdictions that are split between more than one municipality. In the town of Ossining, you have both. Hypothetically, if the town of Ossining were to adopt homestead, the town would effectively control the town tax, the village of Ossining, assuming the village of Ossining were to adopt because it's a non-assessing unit and it's wholly contained. And there would also be a few part-town type taxes and a few special districts to which that would be applicable. However, as Dr. Benjamin mentioned, the two school districts, the Ossining School District and the Briarcliff Manor School District, are not wholly contained. They are governed by a separate law in homestead, and the conditions would exist for each one of them to consider the adoption of homestead, because a minimum of 20% of their parcel count would reside in the town of Ossining. The reason I'm bringing this up, I know, or at least I've been given to understand, there is interest in the possibility of a community adopting homestead and then making changes so that the differential tax rates of homestead and non-homestead could be made virtually the same. And this is where the differences in these two different laws under Article 19 come into play. Under 1903, which would again affect the town of Ossining and potentially the village of Ossining and the part-town highway and a few special district taxes, the town could indeed take advantage of an option that exists. The jargon is a local adjustment to the base proportions. The short version, trying to say that in English, is the town could pass something to bring those shares hypothetically all the way. There are different increments prescribed by law, but in the most extreme, the town could bring those to the shares that would have existed or that would exist as a result of the reassessment, which would allow adoption in the first place. What that means in English is for those tax extensions, the tax rates for homestead and non-homestead, while I'm not going to say they would be identical, they would be virtually identical. There might be some difference in the tax rate, several decimals out to the right of the decimal point, but this is a way to make the tax rates the same, or virtually the same. However, and this is why I stress this and I kind of butted in at this point, that is not possible for the taxing jurisdictions subject to 1903A. So the two school districts, and hypothetically, the Village of Briarcliff Manor, because that is also a split taxing jurisdiction, they determine their shares under the manner prescribed in 1903A, which is different. And the short version here, again, I don't want to eat up a lot of time, I just wanted to make clear that for those three taxing jurisdictions, it would not be feasible. There is no local adjustment allowed by law to do what the town could do under 1903. So I hope that makes some sense. No? Okay, let me try it again. Again, my understanding is there is some thinking here that the town could adopt homestead and do something magic to make the homestead and non-homestead tax rate the same. That's, well, again, this is what I've been given to understand. Well, the only point in doing that...
John, I think they don't understand what we're talking about. I think you got to give real details. So when you say that there's a thought process to have the town have the non-homestead and the homestead be the same, in this hypothetical world, where if homestead were to be enacted, the homestead would be whom? The single families, the condos, the commercial, who would they be?
Okay.
That's where we have to go.
All right, so we need to get a lot more basic than this. So homestead are all 1 and 2, 3 family homes. They're all, well, you don't have any mobile homes here. It's all vacant land zoned exclusively for 1, 2, and 3 family use that are 10 acres or less. It would be any mixed-use property that is considered predominantly residential, and I'm not talking about apartment buildings. I'm talking about a one-family house that may have a home occupancy zoning permit where it allows the owner to perhaps devote a room or two to an accountant's office or some sort of business like that, but essentially it's still primarily that individual's residence. You don't really have ag properties here, so I'm not going to go into that. The other big aspect of homestead, which certainly during the initial project brought a lot of people in and brought a lot of concern, are condominiums. Homestead does not affect how properties are assessed, except for one exception, those being condominiums. The law says that condominiums that were built as condominiums or converted from a use other than residential use are classified as homestead and are assessed on a market value basis, in other words, what they sell for. The condominiums that are converted from a residential use by law are classified as non-homestead and receive an assessment based on the traditional methodology, which is income-based. And I won't speak about that more because I know Dr. Benjamin...
I think what's happening is we're preempting.
Okay.
So let me demonstrate the points, and then if the questions remain, we'll come back to them, because we're preempting the presentation and not in an orderly way. Okay? And I don't want to dismiss, all the information was entirely accurate, but let me present it in a straightforward way. The tax levy divided by the tax base is the rate. The town board every year determines how much is needed for its budget. The assessor determines the base. The rate is determined by the town board against the base to produce the levy. The value of real property is determined through in the market between an arm's length transaction between buyer and seller. You want to sell your house, somebody wants to buy your house, the market determines what your house is worth. Equitable taxation requires determining value when a property is not in the market. The assessor determines that value. There are three ways to determine value that are used in New York. One is the market, the sales, or comparables to the sales, the cost, usually to replace a property if it's a reasonably unique property, or the income potential of the property used for income-producing property like apartment houses. It's mandated, the income method is mandated for condominiums if the homestead option is not adopted by the community. So the assessment of condominiums without the homestead option is directed to be on a different basis than the assessment of other residences. So we're talking about the assessment requirements on the assessor for how the assessor makes that determination. Without homestead, condos must be valued on a different basis than small private residences. With homestead, condos are treated like comparable residential properties. So this is the nub of the matter. There's a lot of small print. Not important, except that the income method is different than the sales method and has to be used in the circumstance where there's no homestead, no homestead, no use of the homestead option. Why does the legislature mandate the income method? Now this is based on litigation that is further based on judges' determinations that the legislature did not have because they thought it overvalued condos. It's done in the same historic period where we had the crisis in property taxation in New York that the legislature responded to. To gain lower taxes, if there is no adoption of the homestead system, the developer may seek to create a legal fiction of a condominium development. It's called a duck, but does not walk like, swim like, or quack like a duck. It's a legal fiction. Note, this reduces the increase to the local tax base resulting from a new development. So, if you have no homestead, a developer can say, well, I want my property to be treated like a homestead. Let's call it a condominium and get it legally classified as a condominium. And that's actually happening in New York. To gain lower taxes, if there's no adoption of the homestead system, a homeowner association or existing PUD, planned unit development, may seek a change in the legal status to a condominium association. This has occurred in Mamaroneck, New York. This results in a net reduction of the local tax base, redistributing the tax burden to other property owners. This may be prevented by the local government under state law. The local government has to adopt a resolution, has to take an action to prevent this from happening. So essentially, the story is this. Condos have to be assessed in a different way if there's no homestead option taken up. They have to be assessed as residential properties if the homestead option is taken up. So that's the choice that the community faces, and that's the consequence of the choice. It affects the tax base of the community and shifts the tax burden. And there are also economic consequences of adopting the homestead system. And Tom's going to talk about those. Okay, so John's point is this, that there's state law that allows you to bring the rate of taxation for under the homestead system, allowed to bring you the rate of taxation for commercial and residential properties, homestead and non-homestead properties, very close to each other for jurisdictions that adopt the homestead option and jurisdictions wholly contained within those jurisdictions. State law does not allow that to happen for jurisdictions that are not wholly contained within the homestead jurisdiction. School districts are not wholly contained, in this case, are not wholly contained within the homestead jurisdiction. What does that mean? It means that the place that taxes you the most cannot be brought into equivalence for an equivalent rate for the commercial and non-commercial properties, because the school district demands the highest portion of the property tax. So even though you might approach equivalency for the town and contained villages, you cannot approach equivalency using the two parts of the pie approach in the taxation of school districts.
About 60% of your taxes.
What Dr. Benjamin is referring to is a local option. Most places that adopt homestead don't follow through on that, because understand, typically when a municipality adopts homestead, its purpose is to insulate the homestead class. And the actions that we're talking about here would only serve to bring the shares closer to what each class would have paid without the reassessment having occurred.
So the point is you lose the reason for doing it. Now, why do you have this? Because the state legislatures try to keep everybody happy all the time, so it increases levels of complexity, and nevertheless doesn't solve the problem. And I'm not being cynical, I'm being descriptive.
I'm going to briefly talk about the study that Jerry and I did in Kingston, and a community whose commercial sector desperately wanted to get the city out of homestead after they had adopted it. Kingston adopted homestead when IBM was a major employer there, so it was very easy to shift the tax base to a big employer. Unfortunately for Kingston, IBM closed down in Kingston.
So it's irrelevant.
And now what remained of the commercial sector had to pick up what IBM basically left. So let's go through what we found in Kingston. Essentially, what we looked at is what happened in Kingston once they adopted homestead, and what happened to those shares of the pie that Dr. Benjamin spoke about. And what happened in Kingston is the homestead share of the pie, the homeowner share of the pie, the value of their property appreciated significantly more than the value of the commercial property. Again, a lot due to the loss of IBM. Okay? So what that did, they did not adopt the option that John was talking about that would allow them to keep their commercial and, their non-homestead and homestead shares closer together, because it defeated the purpose of adopting homestead in the first place, which was to reduce the burden on homeowners. So what happened is the tax rate paid by commercial properties significantly increased as relates to the tax rate paid by homestead properties. And in Kingston, which we looked at other communities in the Mid-Hudson Valley when we did this, Kingston had the highest differential. Commercial tax rates were 1.8 to 1. If you're the same, you're 1 to 1, right? So in essence, the commercial tax rate was almost twice the tax rate of homeowners. Great for homeowners, not great for businesses. And the business community in Kingston believed that that was a significant detriment to attracting more commercial businesses and to do greater economic development in Kingston. Other areas that adopted homestead did not have as great a differential. Poughkeepsie was 1.2 to 1, and these are based on our study in 2013. For us to update this data, it would take about a month, so we have not done that. But we have no reason to believe that these shares have significantly changed since 13, and you can see what they were: 1.2 to 1, 1.5 to 1, 1.3 to 1, 1.6 to 1. In most communities that adopt homestead, eventually, because of the statewide trend that commercial property appreciates at a lower rate than residential properties, what happens is their tax rate goes up greater than the homeowner's tax rate. And if you think about it, that's why communities adopted homestead in the first place, to a large extent. Again, the Kingston School District rate was not as significant as the city of Kingston. It was 1.5 to 1. But in most cases, in fact, in every case that we studied that we were able to get data from, and there were some jurisdictions that did not or did not have data available for us when we did this in 2013 to see what their ratios are. But in most cases, in every case that we looked at, the commercial sector paid a higher tax rate, somewhere between 1.8 to 1 and 1.2 to 1. Let's see, why isn't that going? Oh, okay. I think, no, I didn't, there we go. All this chart does is show you what I just said, okay? All that chart shows you is what I just said. One is the homestead rate, one is the non-homestead rate. One is Kingston, it's the ratio. The yellow is the school district. The orange is the city of Kingston. You can see at one point in time, the commercial tax rate was 2.2 to 1 in 2008, when there was a pretty big crash in the real estate market statewide, which is what caused that to spike. You can see that the homeowners ratio, the school district ratio was flat. This just puts in tabular form what I already showed you about Poughkeepsie, Port Jervis, Newburgh, Kingston, and Beacon. Again, you'll notice that in all those cities, the tax rate was greater for commercial than they were for residential. And again, the business community in all these communities felt that was a reason why, one of the reasons why all those communities were having difficulty attracting economic development. The inability to attract commercial businesses, because businesses don't have certainty as to what their taxes are going to be. They know that they have to pay a certain share of the pie, and that pie changes, and their tax rate changes every year based on the assessed value of their property. Again, just showing you this documents what I've already told you, that from 1991 to 2013, the total value of homestead property in Kingston raised about 20%. The total value of non-homestead property raised about 9.8%, about half. Hence, the disparity in their tax rate, because there's less of their value to support their share of the pie. So businesses have to pay more. And the note at the end just talks about a statistical point, that actually the growth rates were greater if you moved it back 1 year. And this chart just shows you again the market values and how they've changed over time in Kingston between homestead and non-homestead. The big dip in Kingston was after 2008. My guess is for homestead properties that has probably gone up in Kingston. And my guess is since Kingston commercial properties have had some growth, particularly along the riverfront, theirs has gone up. But their ratio is not much different than 1.8 to 1 today. If it's anything, it's 1.7, 1.6. Okay, we were asked by the city of Kingston, is there statistical evidence that when you move to homestead, can you statistically prove that the higher property tax rates that commercial businesses pay have a statistically significant impact on a decision to locate in the community? There's been like 3 or 4 studies that have looked at this. 2 of them were done by the Syracuse University. We did one, and I forget the other. Albany, yes, SUNY Albany did one. None of the studies have ever found a statistical significant relationship between commercial tax rates and the decision to locate a business there or not. Okay? So there's no statistical evidence that shows a statistically significant relationship between those 2 variables. However, it was actually CGR Rochester that also looked at this. Most studies, in fact, every study that we looked at said, while you cannot statistically prove that, most studies believe that it did have a real effect based on what the business community was telling them and what was happening in those communities. Statistics sometimes can't prove facts that might be evident when you just talk to people and ask them a question. Every study believes that while you can't statistically prove that the homestead system negatively impacts economic development and business decisions to locate in a community, perceptually, all the studies find that that is true. And the reason is the cycle that Dr. Benjamin and John referred to. What happens when homestead property appreciates at a greater rate than non-homestead properties, and you maintain the same share of the pie, you basically create a cycle where the commercial sector is constantly paying more and does not know what its tax rate's going to be, and that gap widens over time. And again, what this shows here is as known, the share of the tax base in '89 for non-homestead was 36%, and in 13 it was 31, minus 5%, percentage change of 13.9. And you can see, again, this is just another way of looking at what I showed you before, that in essence, non-homestead tax levy share increases when the share of the when their property values don't appreciate at the same rate as a homestead property.
Can I ask for clarification on one thing? Because I just heard somebody over here say, well, what about condos? All this time, when you've been referring to commercial businesses and commercial properties, or
I'm sorry, I know that there's gonna be a lot of questions.
Yeah, but
We're almost done with the presentation. I think we got one more slide.
Just
So,
a second.
and then you can come up and ask that question. But this is the whole reason. I'm sure that there's lots of questions.
Enough of the confusion. I think the confusion for a lot of people is when you're referring to commercial properties and non-homestead, those also include condos, correct?
No, they do not. When you move to a homestead system, condos must move to the home. John, you explain.
So, condominiums, I mentioned this earlier, if a condominium is built as a condominium, or if it is converted from a use other than residential, it will end up in the homestead class, and it will receive a market value assessment. If, on the other hand, a condominium is converted from a residential use, which typically means the building started out as an apartment building or a cooperative apartment building, then it is classified as non-homestead. It stays in the non-homestead class and it receives the non-homestead tax rate. But its assessment is based on the traditional income-based methodology that was mentioned in the presentation. There is no absolute because this really depends on the makeup of the individual community. In the town of Ossining, as we saw in the initial project, all of the condominiums would have been classified as homestead and would have gone into the homestead class and received market value assessments. In other communities, that's different. For example, in Mamaroneck, there were some properties that were homestead, and I'm talking strictly condominium. There were some that were non-homestead, depending on how they started out their life. So it does vary. There is no absolute with this. It's really dependent on the community in question.
But this community, you were able to say, Fernando, are all of our condos in the community the types that would end up being homestead?
The answer is yes.
So I think in order to get it clear, we don't want to talk about what the possibilities are in other places because it just clouds.
And I was short-circuited when I said that. I should have said in the town of Austin. So, how can you, there are many people that have tried to change the homestead system, trying to keep the best parts of it and get rid of the parts that they don't like. Unfortunately, the state legislature is not known for its courage, okay? And it's also not known for tackling problems dealing with real property taxes in a way that is likely to negatively impact anybody's property taxes. They prefer the status quo. So, since homestead has been adopted, the only changes that have passed, both houses, have been changes that limit the adjustment to class shares, which under the law, you can't shift in any year more than 5%, and Clarkstown, right?
It's only for select municipalities.
Right, Clarkstown and Suffolk and some things in Vassar have got the shifts in class share reduced to 1%. Other than that, the state legislature has not made any major changes to the homestead system. Now, once you're in homestead, getting out of it is difficult. Why is it difficult? Well, in Kingston, to get out of homestead and to go back to one tax rate would have increased homeowners' taxes by 27%. So there's no town board that's ever going to do that. Never going to happen, all right? Now, in 2009, John's office crafted legislation to try to, the major problem with homestead is what I talked about when I said non-homestead properties appreciate at a different rate than homestead properties. And so their tax rates diverge, particularly over time. So Office of Real Property Tax Services noticed this problem and proposed legislation that said that at a local option, you could adopt after a full value reassessment again and make that difference never more than 1.25 to 1. And it would give you a certain amount of time to phase that in. I think it was 5 years to phase in that lower number. Now that's as a purely academic person, we think that's a pretty good piece of legislation. It passed the Senate, but it didn't pass the Assembly. And why didn't the Assembly pass it? Because it would have had the impact of raising certain homeowners' property taxes. And they didn't want to run on that. So that legislation never passed. There are other options that you have to try to limit the impact once you're in homestead to get out of homestead. The only two communities I know that have gotten out of it are Colony in upstate New York, outside of Albany, and Schenectady in upstate New York. Both did it at a time of a revaluation, so property owners really had no idea why their taxes might have changed. They couldn't blame it on one system or the other, and generally they were able to blame it on the reval. All right? And in both of those communities, they were at the lower end. Their ratio was like 1.2 to 1. So again, easier for them to get out of it. So those are the different policy options that have been out there to try to change homestead, to try to get rid of the negative aspects of homestead. None of them have advanced. Obviously, localities like Ossining could ask for special legislation, and you could roll the dice to see whether you could get both houses of the legislature to do something special for you. But I can tell you that generally the legislature doesn't like to do one thing for one community because other communities are going to ask for the same thing. But I can't say that's not possible. Anything's possible. I worked in the legislature for 20 years, so anything is possible. But the legislature has never done a major change in homestead since it created it.
We know that. We don't want it. We don't want it.
You don't want it, but commercial people may want it. So I'm not.
All right, so that, we'll stop here, and the fundamental point Tom's making is you're making a choice that's going to be, from a political point of view, almost irreversible. So you need to understand that if you make that choice, you're not going to change it the next day. When you get down the road 5 years from now, you're not going to easily change it. So that's a consideration. In simple terms, that's a consideration. Now I'm going to turn this over to the board, and we'll answer any questions.
So before we get into the questions from our community, I just wanted to give the board a chance if there's any question that you maybe heard that you thought would be helpful to ask on behalf of a group of people. Do you want to?
I just hope I'm clear in my understanding of what we were saying. Whether all of Austin's condos would be homestead under this provision, number one. Number two, when we start getting into this conversation about this law and that law, I think what we're saying, what you're trying to tell us, is under the hypothetical of enacting, the town of Ossining and the village of Ossining, because they're wholly contained, would be able to enact a certain way. But the school districts, because they are not wholly contained, which are the higher percentages of our taxes, would not act that same way. Nor the village of
What we're
Brentwood.
saying is that you can't adopt a homestead, non-homestead option with no consequences.
I got it.
There are consequences. And then one of the consequences is in some measure, in some significant measure, your property tax rates will be different in the two classes. You can't have the magic of having homestead, non-homestead, and no change in the property tax rates, no difference between the property tax rates.
I think to that point, and that's, so I think the whole issue about the non-homestead and the homestead and keeping them the same, which is where we really got into the weeds for a second. I think what you're trying to say is that if there's this concern about, amongst many things, the commercial businesses taking a negative hit on the possible enactment, that there's possibility of this law under this quagmire where you could essentially try to keep the rates for both the homestead option, which in this hypothetical means all single family, 2-3 family homes plus condos in this hypothetical, and the commercial as close to possible so that neither one of them is taking on the hugest tax disproportionate
Part of the burden.
That's what's trying to be said. What we know is that there's a significant portion of this population in this room right now who wants to say, but we would be taking the significant, right? So we get that. We get that. But I'm just trying to get clear what they're saying so that everybody's on the same page, and then at least we're not all cloudy. So was that clear at least in terms of what they were trying to say? Okay.
You can't do the non-homestead, homestead adjustment in your 2 school districts in the village of Briarcliff. Okay? You can't do that at all.
At all, or in the same way?
Not true.
You can't avoid having differential tax rates on a large portion of your,
So you could still have two separate classes, but you couldn't.
We'll have 2 separate classes.
You would have 2
You
separate.
can't equalize the rate
You can't equalize the
for
rate.
those categories of jurisdiction.
Right, okay. I just want to check with the other board members. Do you want to? Okay, so I know we have a lot of people. This is what I would just ask. We know and we have heard very loud and clear from the condominiums for a variety of, reasons why you oppose homestead. If somebody comes up here and says, articulates all the reasons, you don't have to say them again. That's all I'll say. Okay, so we're here to learn. This is like a learning opportunity for everybody in the community to hear what could happen if we did enact a homestead, if we did decide to do that down the line. And there's some people who have opinions about why some of this information may or may not be correct. I'm sure that we'll hear from them. But if you have what I just said, please try not to repeat if you already heard it, so that we could just get through as many questions as possible. That will help us all understand better. Now, the microphone, I think we're going to use the microphone over there where Maddie is. Thank you, Maddie. And Maddie's going to call people who signed up. If you have not signed up and you do want to ask a question, and we can get through all the people who did sign up. And she also has a timer over there. Our town clerk has a timer. We're going to limit everybody's questions and comments to 3 minutes. We'll try to answer them if we can as quickly as possible if it's a question. And if it's just a comment, then we'll go on to the next one. Okay? Thank you. Addie?
Yes, okay, in the meanwhile, I do have the list here. If there are folks who did not sign up to speak who would like to do that, I will start a new sheet. Okay, so that sheet is right here. Additionally, I'm gonna call 3 names at a time because I know we're very crowded, so if you could start making your way over when you hear your name, that would be good. The first 3 names are Lynn Farrell, Diane Hegarty, and Mark Seiden.
I'm just Dana again. I just want to say, I know we all have opinions, but we know what our opinions are. We really do. let's try to be polite and civil and respectful.
You know, we're all in one community, and we may have differences of opinions, but it's no reason to be rude.
I do want to say one other thing, because I know, again, many of you here tonight are from, live in condominiums, and we know how you feel. But I received over 200 postcards to our office from homeowners who are in favor of homestead, and I didn't receive quite as many who were opposed to it. I received many emails from condo owners who are opposed to it, but there are many people in the community who are for it. So please, again, be respectful, and let's hear what everybody has to say.
Hi, my name is Lynn Farrell. I live at 226 Horseshoe Circle. And first, I'd like to thank the town board and the members of the state of New Paltz for coming here on behalf of all the condominium owners. My question's a little more technical. I'm not expressing an opinion here. But I believe that the town has already decided not to adopt homestead. They found that the burden shift would not be sufficient to justify the huge change in the tax rate. So my question is this. From what I understand from the various readings I've done, the town of Ossining would first need to be certified again as an approved assessing unit if they now wanted to adopt the homestead option in any given year. In the absence of conducting a full evaluation, my understanding is that the town would have to conduct and complete an annual reassessment or update, which in turn would require, and I quote from the statute, a systematic review or systematic analysis of the assessments. And I believe you've also said that simply looking at the results of the market value would not meet the requirements for a systematic analysis. So that being said, please describe for us in some detail what is involved in conducting a systematic review or systematic analysis, explaining how much time and money, approximately, that such an analysis would require, and tell us whether you think there would be sufficient sales of property in the town of Ossining to derive meaningful statistics to judge the results. And also, if those tests can't be made, is there any other method, such as a town referendum, that would allow the town board to institute homestead? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. Relative to the requirements for passing homestead, you're absolutely right. The town has to conduct a reassessment. The town did its initial reassessment in 2016, and in 2017, it also did a reassessment. So essentially, what the law says, in any year a reassessment is done, homestead can be considered. Realistically, what has happened in communities that have adopted homestead, and I think this is what both Mr. Citrino and Dr. Benjamin are saying, the real reason for adopting homestead typically is a big shift or a significant shift from non-residential to residential property. If that's going to happen, that happens in the year of an initial reassessment, which again, Ossining's initial reassessment was in 2016. Ossining's last reassessment, I think, was back in 1968? 72, sorry. So it was still well over 40 years. Point being that if you've done an initial reassessment and a town finds there is not a big enough shift to warrant the adoption of homestead, while legally homestead can be adopted in any subsequent year a reassessment is conducted, the shifts that will occur are going to be much, much smaller. So there really is not, unless there is some enormous change in the makeup of property, such as a huge development, a huge mall coming online, or a utility generating plant or something of that nature, which is pretty atypical, you're not going to be experiencing the shifts in subsequent reassessments that you would have in the first.
John, just to bring it back, so the technical question, though, was, have we done what is necessary to be establish ourselves as as an assessing unit, so that we could have the option to adopt homestead in this year and subsequent years? What has to be done, and is there an option to go to a referendum to decide about homestead? So I think that the answer.
I was getting.
Okay, but we have to we have a lot of questions, so we need to try to get those responses a little quicker. Okay. So just to get to the heart of the matter.
Okay. So yes, In maintaining the level of 100% each year, the town is reassessing. The town could consider adopting homestead. In any year it does a reassessment. It has been doing a systematic analysis. I believe it is the intent of the town to do that for 2018 as well. As far as a referendum, no. There is nothing in the law, to my knowledge, that allows for a referendum for the adoption of homestead. That is an action of the town board.
Thank you.
I'm Diane Hagerty. I live at 1306 Eagle Bay in Ossining, and obviously I'm opposed to the Homestead Act. I'm here tonight because I submitted an ethics complaint to the Ossining Ethics Board on October 6th. That was against Sal Ferreira and Gary Kirchner, as they are two of the three realtors that formed the Citizens for the Town of Ossining for Fair Taxation. In my belief, soliciting funds through a GoFundMe account to support their venture while serving as members on the zoning committee is a conflict of interest, since they have voting power on the zoning board or raising funds, so that may sway their votes. I've been calling the town since November 6th, which was 1 month after I submitted it, and my voicemails have not been returned. I've spoken to people personally who promised to call me back and never called me back. So I really want to know what's happening with that ethics complaint. I did it as a private citizen, although I happen to be on my condo board, but this was personally from me. And after 6 weeks, I'd like to know what's going on, if you could answer that for me.
So the procedure for anything that would come and be submitted would go directly to the ethics board. I do believe that the ethics board has met, but they have not come back yet with a decision.
Okay. Do you have a time frame?
They have not come back to us with any kind of they're a different group, so they haven't reported out yet to the board. So I don't know.
Well, I don't want to surprise anybody because I only like surprises on my birthday. But when I didn't get an answer today, I went to the news media. They're very interested in me, and I have an awful lot to say because I think after 6 weeks I should be getting some sort of an answer. And at least somebody should have called me back and told me that they weren't meeting yet.
I think the town supervisor will check into the process with respect to the ethics board to see what their notification process would be. I'm going to go out on a limb, and I'm going to say something. I happen to own a house. I'm a homeowner. I'm also, previously at my town board, did not enact homestead. Wouldn't being a homeowner be considered conflicted out and possibly voting against that I could not vote in an objective way?
It's not the same.
Yeah, but nobody's paying you.
Well, actually, I get paid a whole $11,214 a year to be your elected town board member, actually. It's a lot of money, I know. I'm just saying, I'm not the ethics board. I'm just saying when we talk about people and people, it's just, the question about conflicts is just an interesting one.
You don't have a GoFundMe page.
That's a different thing. I think we're gonna take the next question. We will look into what the timing is for the ethics board to make a determination.
When will you have an answer?
Okay, my name is Mark Seiden, 49 Croton Avenue. So the reason why this was really brought up is because the town of Ossining basically said on their own, without a groundswell of people asking for it, said that we really needed to tax more fair in the town of Ossining. So 2 or 3 years ago, however long it was, they created the whole new townwide reassessment in order to make taxation more fair. And based on that, without a public demand asking for it, they did it because that's what was right to do. And because they did that, there were over 3,500 people whose taxes went up, whose assessments went up and then taxes went up. 3,500. Certainly not as high as the condos would go up, I understand that. But there were 3,500 people affected by the higher assessment. Why did they get assessed higher? Because that's what was fair. Because there were other people that were overassessed and they came down. So at this point, we're just asking them to continue the same fair taxation, because the condos really were not affected. Now, I hear a lot of times that the condos...
Not true.
Excuse me. If you would like to come up, you can come up.
Hey guys, we are not doing back and forth. We're not. We are adults, and we are going to let people who go up speak without being interrupted or yelled at. Thank you. Continue.
So basically, I've heard from a lot of condos that they pay common charges, so they shouldn't pay higher taxes. And the reason why that's troubling is for two reasons. One, there are quite a few PUDs, planned unit developments, townhouses that look like condos that are not condos, that pay full taxation and pay full common charges. But I heard a lot of people say in the common charges, but we pay for a lot of things that the town doesn't pay for. So I did an analysis. And I would say anybody who's on a condo board can go to the financials and do a really true analysis of what condos actually pay for that the town would technically pay for. And I took two condos, Briarcliff Woods and Fox Hill, and I analyzed it by looking at the financials. And here's how scary it really is. A condo unit in Briarcliff Woods pays about $71 a month out of their entire common charge for things that would still be paid by condos. You guys are getting a 45 to 60% reduction in taxes. So you're not paying about $5,000 per year per unit, because you're paying for $845 with the things that the town could technically pay for. So for a $5,000 discount, it's for $845. I did the same thing for Fox Hill. It's even more.
Time's up.
Time's up. Time's up. So in summary, I'm a little amazed that we brought Kingston in here to do this when there are actually 6 other communities within Westchester and Putnam that are only 20 miles away that instituted homestead. And we don't see anything here about if anything's bad or good there, but we took a community that was 72 miles away that did this 30 years ago. It was a bad example.
Just to remind the audience, we came here at the request of the board to report on research already done. The community wants comparative research done in Westchester. It can certainly commission that research by us or others. This criticism of the example we have is not considerate of the fact that we're producing the presentation based on the research already done, as I announced at the outset.
I think that the other issue is that other communities, this has been in place for a long time, and that's significant, Mark, because it's been in place for a long time, you can see what the effect is over time. And that was where this board and those of us who were on the board at the time that we were coming onto the board, we talked a lot about how the impact over the long term is going to be negative, and that's what our concern was. And when we looked at what was out there, the best example, even though imperfect, there's no perfect example, but the best example was to look at Kingston. And because that study had been done and was complete and was done, and I know you're not listening to me, but I was listening to you, just saying. Because it was a complete study, and it looked over the long term what the consequences could be, and we knew that there was no going back. We wanted for other people to understand why we had made the decision that we had, which was to not pursue homestead for this community. We thought it had a negative impact that had in broader context, even though in the short term it might look like it had a positive impact, in the long term it was not going to have a positive impact. And we wanted people to understand where that was coming from, including you.
We don't have an idea.
Okay, can we have the next question or statement, please?
Yep, the next 3 names on the list are Jerry Gershner, Mary Fleck, and Angela C. from Briarcliff Drive South.
I've had my experience personally. You don't tell the truth. I bought my unit 3 years.
Just so coincidentally today, in the Westchester Business Journal, came an article about Kingston. Right? And I'm going to read a couple of paragraphs. Walking through the district of the Ulster County City, signs of a boom are clear. Coffee shops, eateries, and boutique shops line the streets, which make up the main block in the district. One resident said we have that mix of artists, techies, and food. It's really close to everything we think you need for a sustainable business community and environment to live in. All right? In this past September, the city received a $10 million grant from the State Downtown Revitalization Initiative to help build on its momentum. So much for Kingston. Right? But I did want to thank you for holding this meeting. As the board is aware, we submitted our report 9 months ago, but we've never been invited to discuss it with you. We'd still like that opportunity. With that being said, though, I do want to acknowledge the support of Supervisor Levenberg, who is a big believer in fair taxation. As a matter of fact, I was present at the anti-Trump golf course assessment rally in Briarcliff this past summer, when she proclaimed from the podium on the back of a pickup truck that, quote, everyone should pay their fair share of taxes. And everyone greeted her with a big round of applause, and I could not agree with her more. Just as a note, when the anti-Trump rally was being held on Dalmady Road, right behind it were a bunch of houses built on the Trump golf course. The last sale occurred a couple of years ago of a house. $1,425,000 was the sale. Nice. Except the assessment was only $926,000, or 65% of the market value. Why was the assessment so low? Because the houses are condominiums, and we have several thousand homeowners who are subsidizing them. Like Ms. Levenberg said, everyone should pay their fair share of taxes. The Kingston report that we heard about is not meaningful here in Ossining. Kingston's a city, Ossining is not. Kingston made an error when they adopted different tax rates. Ossining will not have to do that. And one portion of the summary of the report states, it found no significant statistical relationship between non-homestead, which is commercial property values, and homestead property tax rates. The factor that had the most impact on non-homestead property values was the property crime rate. They also said that in a study out of Syracuse University, economic studies do not find evidence that taxes are significant in state and local economic development. Yes? All right. Let me just bring up one quick issue.
Reset the clock. Another one.
Good evening. Just one second before you go. Did you want to say something, Jerry?
Yeah, we presented that information. There's no, when you do a multivariate analysis, the tax rate's not significant. Determination of locational decisions. We also talk to realtors and we talk to business members of the business community. The uncertainty about their tax rate, uncertainty is a significant factor in when an individual calculates whether to locate in Kingston or an adjacent community with their business. That's interview information. So it's also very important to understand that there's an important equity issue that's being raised by the advocates of the homestead alternative. There is an equity issue. The question is whether the remedy is the appropriate remedy for the equity problem with the potential negative consequences of the remedy over the long term. Nobody who studies this thinks that it's equitable. The practice for assessing under condominiums, under non-homestead conditions, produces equitable taxation. Nobody argues that. What you need to do is find a remedy that will not risk the community's core in the future. Regarding the development of Kingston, that's a very important observation and contemporary, based on the relocation of people who can no longer live in Brooklyn because of the cost of living there. There's a long way to go in Kingston before the negative consequences felt by the community of dual taxation system are entirely mitigated. I hope, I've lived in Ulster County for a long time, I hope that Kingston experiences the same boom as Beacon and some other cities in New York. But they still face the fundamental problems of the dual taxation system for their business communities and their competitiveness. There's no question about it.
And they also went through 2 recessions in the 80s and the early 2000s. So it's not fair to say that all this...
Okay, okay, so we're going to take that next question or statement from the next person.
My name is Mary Fleck, and I'm from the Briar Oaks condos. It's a small garden apartment type of building off of North State Road, and it's in the unincorporated village of Ossining. There is no, we have no pool, no clubhouse, no, there's no tennis court, there's no playground. Our land is a wetland. The common charges, my condo is 1,200 square feet. The common charges pay for, well, they also pay for garbage pickup 3 times a week and driveway repairs with the storm drains repairs. We have assessments also for that. Half of the building, it's a very small building, are retirees. If our taxes double, many of our owners would have to sell at a loss. And that's why I think that enacting homestead would be very detrimental to condominium owners.
Did Angela C. from Briarcliff Drive, South? No? Okay. The next 3 on the list are Phyllis Shabad, Bernard Jacobson, and John Lancapuco.
Gentlemen, thank you for coming, and your presentation was enlightening to some degree. I learned a new meaning of the word differential. My name is Phyllis Shabbat. I'm a condo owner. I live in the community for 29 years. None of those examples that you gave of Port Jervis and Kingston are even relevant to residents of Ossining, the town of Ossining. So it's interesting to me. I didn't know that a study wasn't done on this town. So I'd like to get some more information. The data were interesting, but as far as I'm concerned, data, fair and equitable taxation does not live alone inside a spreadsheet. So I needed a visual, a story of how this would have affected me as a condo owner. And to the gentleman who was formerly in the state legislature, who gave faint praise, for the New York State Senate, oh boy. I'd like to ask you in particular and the professor. This seems to me as if we had enacted the Homestead Act, that it would seem similar to the state of Kansas, what they did in recent years. You know, you're familiar with that, right? They virtually bankrupted their state because what they put in, it was an ill-conceived tax plan that became a tax scheme. And they did something that to me is an analogy. It was like a double rewards program for people who could well afford a tax burden, and they shifted it away from commercial and residential to those people who could least afford it. So could you explain to me how the Homestead Act is similar? I'd like to know.
Well, I guess I don't know enough about Kansas.
They're virtually bankrupt.
But I do know that they made ill-considered tax cuts. And we're not talking about tax cuts here. We're talking about shifting the burden of taxation.
They shifted the burden.
So I don't think the analogy is correct. I'll have to find out more about Kansas. I will say to you that we presented the study we made, not the study that you would prefer. And if we'd made this study for Ossining, we would present a study of Ossining, as I pointed out. Obviously, the analogies between communities are different. The socio-demographics of the community are different. The locations of the community are different. The categories of city and not city or town in New York are not categories that distinguish jurisdictions very effectively. The powers of those jurisdictions are almost identical. The size of towns can be much greater than the size of cities in population and geographic expanse. So the distinctions are, we can talk about the details that you would regard maybe as irrelevant. The fundamental point is this. We studied this. We looked at all the communities. Almost everybody who's adopted wants to get rid of it, and they can't. That's what we discovered.
For safety, I would really ask if people who are standing in the doorway, please not stand. There's room up against the, on the, oh, I can't see, okay. There are some chairs, there's some area over here. Come on in the room, maybe you could sit on the stage. There's a couple chairs here and there, but please don't block the doorway because we don't want there to be a fire hazard, which there probably is. Okay. And our next statement.
My name is Bernie Jacobson. I live on Butternut Road in Briarcliff Manor in a single-family home. I've lived here since 1973 and been paying taxes ever since. There are many community services that I have used sometimes and haven't used for a long time, such as schools. I haven't had a kid in school since 1993. So for the people who think that they shouldn't pay for services that they don't personally use, I think that is not a valid argument. However, my main point is that we went through a town assessment in 2015, I think, spent a lot of money. I'm one of the people who got a gigantic increase, and that's fair because I was being subsidized since 1973. So I got a deal, and now I have to pay up. However, there's another deal going on right now, and that is the way the properties are currently assessed when we differentiate between condominiums and single-family homes. And right now we are saying that for some mysterious reason, it goes back to the 1971 state legislature, condominiums get a break. I think that's unfair and not consistent with the principles of fairness behind the town reassessment. And to illustrate the point, we just heard about and read about the PUD transformation in Mamaroneck to a condominium. What they did was simply a legal transaction. The town didn't even have to vote, and now those people have substantially lower taxes, which means that all the homeowners in the Mamaroneck area are paying more tax. If this doesn't illustrate how unfair the system is and would get even worse if we don't adopt homestead, then I don't know what is. So, and I had one question, please. The speakers from the state said, I believe, that Briarcliff schools, Briarcliff Village, and Ossining schools could not change to homestead. I think if that were true, none of us would be here today. So I think we're all concerned that I think it should happen, and others think it shouldn't happen. But if the board could get a clarification on what the truth is here, or a better understanding. And finally, one suggestion. Excuse me. There are 1,800 condominium owners and 6,000 homes. So I think if the town wants a fair assessment of who's thinking what, rather than having a meeting where one group is much more heavily represented than their population size would indicate, that you should conduct some sort of town survey, a non-binding referendum, or some other means to get the sense of the town rather than just one condominium group. Thank you.
In short, the use of homestead really rises and falls with the town. If the town does not adopt homestead, the villages could not adopt homestead unless they become assessing units again and do their own reassessment, and the school districts have no option to use homestead.
What if the town does adopt it?
If the town were to adopt homestead, the school boards, in the case of Ossining and Briarcliff Manor, could decide if they want to use homestead throughout the entire school district.
Hi, my name is John Mocabuco. My wife Mary and I live at 72 Woodsbrook Circle in the woods. I have a quick question first off. Is there any sort of legal structure for how often this can come up? You know, we had this in a meeting, I guess about a month ago, a year before that. So is there anything that says you can bring this up and try to enact this, you know, every 6 months, every year, every whatever?
Yeah, I think that was actually, it was brought up before by Lynn from the Condo Association, who actually read statute that says every time you go through a reassessment, then the town has the option to enact homestead or choose to consider a homestead.
Didn't hear that.
And we have been reassessing yearly. We made a decision some time ago to keep the rolls at full value, and to do that, we need to reassess. And while not every year is the same as what we did in 2015, there are other ways to do a full value, you know, to make sure that we're at full value, and that's what we had done this year, and what we have intended to do for the next few years, until we would then go back to another full townwide reval, the bigger lift where you go to inside homes.
So that means that every time there's a reassessment, in that year, that whole year, this can come up as many times as it comes up.
It can come up, but there's also deadlines as to when you have to identify yourself as an assessing unit, or apply, right, to become an assessing unit. And that, I think, is what limited us to not consider it this year, because by the time we had looked at if we were going to evaluate again for homestead this year, we had already passed what would have been any realistic deadline to have public hearings, et cetera, and to consider it for the year of 2017.
Okay, so, I mean, I know that in its simplest terms, it just seems like, you know, homeowners want condo owners to pay the same taxes. Now, my wife Mary and I came 5.5 years ago to the woods, and pretty much the deciding factor was that we could afford to live there. Okay, the reason we could afford to live there was because taxes were probably about 1/3 or so of what we could find anywhere else in a single family home. So now obviously if that were to change, you know, we're knocked out of the ballpark, number one. What I don't really understand is why homeowners feel that it's a fair thing to be taxed the same. Because it's apples and oranges, you know. I know some people spoke about common charges, and I realize that doesn't make up for taxes. I get it. But, you know, we have no land to speak of. We live in attached housing, which is great, don't get me wrong, it's not a complaint. We like it, it's a good thing. But for us to pay, in our case particularly, for us to pay the same thing that a homeowner would pay in taxes, number one, we couldn't afford it, and number two, I just don't see where it's justified. It's just not the same thing. And the last thing is, all right, so we bought a townhouse because that's what we could afford. I mean, I'm a painter, and I work for lots of customers who are into retirement, and some of them are thinking about moving because they can't afford it anymore. And it's a horrible thing. You know, some of them have been in their houses 30, 40, even 50 years. But I guess just like we took the townhouse because that's what we could afford, if the taxes on a single-family home are too much, or if you want to pay the same as the condo owners, I mean, I don't want to insult anyone, but you could sell your house and buy a townhouse.
The next three names on the list are Mike Vaughn, Janet Eisenman, and Abby Bergman.
I am Mike Vaughn. I live in the woods, so I'm a condo owner. The board is familiar with me. I've spoken with them at a number of these meetings in the past. And in those meetings, I and other people have talked a lot about things condos don't get, and I'm not going to get into all of that because I know, as you said earlier, Ms. Lindbergh, you guys know those arguments very well. So consider them set. All right? What I do want to speak about, however, is my understanding is when the New York legislature originally enacted the Condominium Act, in the legislature they had the specific intent of trying to encourage condo ownership with the intent to provide a means for moderate income individuals to have an affordable means of obtaining home ownership, and also to maximize the amount of available land that could be used for residential development. Homestead would be directly contradictory to the intent of that Condominium Act, and it would impose undue hardships on the populations who purchased condos in good faith. People like myself, seniors, who were looking to downsize and bring their housing costs more in line with their fixed income situation in retirement. Also young families who are looking for an affordable purchase that would enable them to begin enjoying the benefits of property ownership. Both these populations are critical, I believe, to the multi-generational character of Ossining, which is what makes Ossining such a wonderful place to live, and why my wife and I are so happy that we have moved here. Homestead effectively would render condos unaffordable for a significant portion of these owners and force them out of their homes. Now, Messrs. The three gentlemen sitting over there, two of whom have spoken to you, have said, well, we're not trying to hurt the condo owners. We'll phase it in over 5 years. Well, that does nothing. All that does is postpone or prolong the agony. Yes. But they are real estate agents, and they know only too well that they would have to disclose to a potential buyer the fact that the taxes on that property were going to double in the next 2 or 3 years. And the result of that is that the value of that property would drop significantly. So you'd wind up with our property values plummeting. People would be forced out of their homes, and at the same time, the town would be faced with a barrage of certiorari proceedings with people appealing their taxes. Their tax bases would go down, and that's part of what the academics, forgive me, I forget your names, spoke about. Their assessments would go down, and it would just be a horrible spiral for the town of Ossining. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Janet Eisenman. I live also in the woods. About 6 years ago, I lived in Yorktown for 35 years. And I loved my house, and it was great. I raised my children there. And then the taxes up, and up. And then it became completely unaffordable. So then we were looking for an option. And condominium ownership was that option, because it provided us with a nice place to live in Ossining and an affordable tax rate. And that's what it was, and that's what it should be. Now, my other point is that it seems to me that you're talking about these places who have enacted homestead who are trying to get out of it. It can't be so great if everyone's trying to get out and they can't get out.
I'm Abby Bergman. I live in a condo in Ossining. Moved to one after having been in another one for 13 years in Ossining also. The first person in this set said what I really wanted to say, and so I don't want to be redundant. But I don't think the people who are in favor of homestead consider strongly enough the fact that real estate prices are fungible, and they depend on many, many factors. It's a ball of wax. So if real estate taxes in condos double, the prices to buy condos will go down significantly. There'll be lots of certiorari's. So the tax rate, so the taxes on everyone will increase. So it seems to me like a fool's errand for those who feel that their taxes are going to go down and they're going to get their fair share. It's only going to go up. It may take 2 years, it may take 3 years, but it's certainly not going to do what those people think it's going to do. My last comment is, since we did not have reevaluation for, what was it, 28 years, why are we doing it every year, and is there a cost to doing it every year? We don't want to go through this agony every year. Why don't we just say, we've reevaluated, we spent a lot of money on it, and now let's just sail out for another few years. I don't know why we have to do it every year.
Well, can we ask the assessor who's sitting here, who hasn't said anything? If I gotta sit here, you gotta say something. No. My question was to the point of the issue of the annual assessment. I think you might want to clarify what real cost is and how that works very quickly versus what the 5-year plan is.
Good evening. Once again, it's been a long time. It's been a few months at least that I haven't addressed this issue, but I'm glad to be here and listening to both sides of the argument. Basically, the initial investment on the reassessment that was implemented in 2016, while the bond was for 1.8 million, I think we spent less than that, a lot less than that, about 1.4 million combined. The cost of doing it annually, in order to doing the systematic analysis of the sales and trending to maintain the values at market, at current market, meaning measuring the differences from year to year and adjusting those assessments up or down according to the market, is mostly in-house with the existing budget, and is minimum. The plan is every 5 years, to do a reappraisal, meaning interior recollection of data, and also is considered an assessment, a reassessment, but is also referred to as a reappraisal. What we do now in between is a reassessment, but it's mostly trending and systematic analysis to maintain the values. Why is done this way? It is considered best practices. Is the best way to maintain the roll accurate, and in order to have fair and equitable values, you have to have accurate data, meaning every time there's a building permit taken, we have to add that inventory to the roll. Every time a garage is removed or a pool is filled in, we have to maintain the roll and adjust the values accordingly. And as you know, as all these experts have explained today here, not all sectors in the real estate market go up and down in value at the same rate. For example, we know very well that apartment rentals in the commercial sector is doing very well, has been doing very well, and the cap rates are very low. But if you look at office buildings in Westchester County, they're still suffering from very high vacancy rates, and the values on those investments is not going up at the same rate. So it is best practices to maintain the roll so that we don't build inequities such as we had prior to the reassessment, where we had a large number of people paying more than their fair share and a large number of people not paying enough. Thank you.
There are more people waiting, because we have about 5 more minutes and then we're going to have to start winding down so we can be out by 9:15.
Okay, I have a list of 5 folks, so I'll name them all, and you can make your way this way. Louise Lord, Noel Duguay, Rob Siegel, Sarah Della Postra, I'm so sorry, and Ron Fleming.
And if you do have questions and you weren't called, and if you'd like to just leave them up with Maddie, or you can leave them with us, whichever side, and we'll try to get answers to your questions and try to post as many of them as we can. And if you know anybody who couldn't make it tonight, as you can see, we were taping this, and it will be up on the town's YouTube page in the next couple of days.
I'm Louise Lord, Briarcliff Woods. Interesting, we just did our budget last week, and if you think that condo owners don't put out a lot of money, you are not looking at reality. And it seems to me, you know that old expression, biting off your nose to spite your face? I think that the real estate agent who started this whole thing might just be doing that. I can't believe that a real estate agent wants to drive people out of the community. I can't believe that a real estate agent wants to see, I'd say, I don't know how many, hundreds of vacant condos because people can't afford to live in them anymore. I pay taxes, my taxes are about $8,000 a year, and that's what I can afford. If you buy a $500,000 house, you know what your taxes are going to be, and you know you can afford it. So don't suddenly try to, wring something out of people who bought with full disclosure, knowing what their expenses would be, and suddenly change them. The other point is, I don't know why you want to hurt your community. Finally, downtown Ossining is starting to have a little bit of a thriving community. We have a coffee house with some music maybe going on a couple nights a week. We have a, what's it called? Where they make their own beer, I can't think of what it's called. A brewery gonna open up. We have a bakery down there. You wanna drive all this out? Do you wanna raise their taxes? Do you wanna drive them out? Again, I can't understand why a real estate agent would want to do this kind of damage to his community. So I think you really need to think twice about this. I think you need to look at the fact that will the school systems do this? Or that's the biggest chunk of our taxes. Oh, a minute, that's a lot of time for a teacher. We can just, anyway. So I just want to say, our condo property values went down. They really went down. And they're just starting to barely creep back up. And if you do this, they're going to crash. And that's it.
Good evening, I'm Noel Duguay. As you can see, I was born in a different country, but I like Libya very much. I live in Rose Place, which is a homeowners association. And we have the same footprint, the same core as condo have on public services. We do our own snow removal, we do our own repaving of our streets and everything, but we pay twice as much as the condo owners. So, I mean, I've heard a lot of arguments, a lot of studies, some I understood, some I didn't understand. But at the end of the day, it's very difficult for me to understand why this option is so low. I mean, if Peter's house is worth the same as Paul's condo, why is Peter paying twice as much in taxes as Paul? I've heard people, condo owners saying, well, but if you're going to raise our taxes, you're going to really decrease the value of our condos. And yes, maybe, but something I can tell you is the fact that we pay twice as much taxes as condo owners did, it has depressed the value of our houses. And it keeps doing it, and there is really no real reason as to why this situation should continue. All we are asking is fairness. The market is saying, your house is worth X, your condo is worth X. If you have very low houses, if you have very low taxes, when you sell your condo, you're getting a much higher value, dollar for dollar, than I would get when I sell my house.
No.
Yes, absolutely. Because the buyer is going to say, my God, I get the same whatever square footage in your condo as in your house, but I'm paying half the taxes. and therefore the value of your condo is going to go higher.
We're not responding. We're not responding. Please, thank you.
I'm not trying to say I want to take money from your pocket and put it in my pocket. I am an immigrant. I came to this country. One of the things that I really believed in is there is justice. I believe in American justice. Actually, the first time I contested my taxes, the assessor who started told that was 40 years ago. Wanted to force, a deal, and then I told the town official, said, you know what, I believe in American justice. And sure enough, she gave me a fair deal. And from that time, I believe we can get a fair deal. And as far as taxes are concerned, we are not asking for anything which is the treatment of favor. We're just asking to be treated the same way, equally as you are. If you want to have a phasing, have a phasing. But it's not fair.
His time had not ended. Let's not be rude.
Hi, I'm Robert Siegel. I live in Scarborough, Glen. So I'll be really quick. You've heard the arguments about the impact on condominium values. I'll put a face to that. Mine and my wife's. We moved here a number of years ago when we were buying the place. One of the things that strongly attracted us to it, one of the things that has kept us there was the relative reasonableness of the real estate taxes. There's no doubt in my mind that if the homestead option is enacted and we are looking at a fairly serious tax increase, we'll move on. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Sarah Della Posta. I live at Kimmy's Cove, and I think it's ridiculous to say that these things are the same. I mean, I live in a condo, and I love living in a condo. I like community life. I like having people near me. But every night, I put my son to bed, and every night, I hear the people above me. And when you have a house, it's your own family who's above you. Have you ever had someone above you who's not so friendly? Sometimes it's really rough. So this is not, I know it's funny to you, Mr. Seiden, but it's not actually funny. We don't have a house. Maybe he's funny, but it's not funny. I don't have a house. I don't go out to the yard. I see 1 million people every day. There's 120 units where I live. It's not the same, and it's ridiculous to act as if it's the same. Thank you. I'm happy for anyone who can afford a house. It's awesome, but let's be realistic. The second thing I'd like to say is earlier there was a comment made about an income of $11,000. And there was an eye rolling, and it was like, yeah, I know that's a lot of money. Well, you know what? That's a lot of money. And if I had an $11,000 income and then it disappeared, for me, for my life, it's the difference between me keeping my house. So you should think about $11,000. It is an important amount of money to some people, maybe not to a house owner. Thank you.
Hi everybody. My name is Don Fleming. I live at Eagle Bay. I am a condo owner. I second everything that was said by all my fellow condo owners tonight. I have a different point to make, however, and that is, from what I got from the professors, is that the perception of an advantageous business environment in a locality that adapts the homestead option drops in a very negative fashion. And if I'm wrong, please correct me. It is correct. Okay. Statistically, nothing can be proven, but the business perception is a tremendous negative. I happen to have had a boating business on the Hudson River for the last 35 years. I know all the Rivertown communities like the back of my hand. I've seen the buildup in Newburgh, Tarrytown, Peekskill, you name it. Everybody's got a vibrant waterfront except for Ossining. it's a shame. It's a real shame. And I think that the current climate is that there is some movement to making our waterfront more vibrant and vital. And I have a boat myself that I keep down at Westerly Marina. I know the DeMarcus family very well. I've known them for many, many years. They said to me that Ossining is a perfect place for a destination. We have a train stop. People could come up from the city. People could come down from upstate. If we had some businesses there that would attract outsiders. And if this Homestead Act is going to in any way negatively affect the perception of an advantageous business environment, we have to be out of our minds to adopt it. Thank you.
We done? Is that the list? Okay. So again, if you had any additional comments, I want to thank everybody for coming out tonight. I also want to say that we, 5 board members, live in single-family homes. And we had made a decision, again, a couple years ago, not to consider homestead because we believe that the information that was out there showed that it had, in the long term, a negative impact on the overall community. And I'm not sure that we have all of the information as some of this group who's, kind of brought this issue back up again, has pointed out that there are communities that have successfully adopted homestead, and we can certainly continue to gather information and to study the issue. I don't believe, and I'm not going to speak for my colleagues, but I don't believe that anybody has been persuaded in the other direction as of yet that it's the better thing to do. I will say that I believe all of us think that this is not the best structure that we were given by our state, that if you had all bought into your condominiums and they had slightly higher taxes or even much higher taxes when you originally bought them and you knew what those were when you bought them and you knew that's how they were going to be taxed, we wouldn't be here today. But we are here today, and to make the change and to move forward would have such a significant impact that we're just not sure that the available remedy of homestead is the right one for our community. And I think so we can continue to look at this. We can discuss if it's worth commissioning a study to see, and we have discussed if it's worth commissioning a study to see what the impact would be potentially on Ossining. If we could sort of take a look at that and maybe look at Westchester specifically, because Westchester is a different county than Ulster. Is that where Kingston is? Yeah. So we can do, there are things that we can do. We can talk about advocacy. How can we advocate to the state legislature that there might be some other way to go? And there is legislation out there that has not gotten significant buy-in from anybody that our own Sandy Galiff has introduced to try to get new condos that come on that are newly built condominiums to have different assessing structure. There's been legislation that looked at phase-in as I think Tom brought up that over time. There hasn't been a remedy yet or a solution yet that has been passed that seems like it would solve Ossining's problem. So we can continue to look, we can continue to advocate, we can continue to talk. I don't think that there's anything in our imminent future that says that we're going to make a change, even though we admit, as much as all of you guys think, this is unfair, this is fair the way it is, some of us don't necessarily think it is fair the way it is, but we don't know that there's a way to get to fair from here easily that would solve our problems. So again, we can continue to look and talk and think and advocate, but I don't know the solution is there tomorrow. That's all. I don't know if my board members want to add anything. Otherwise, I want to just thank everybody and tell you that the conversation isn't over. We will keep talking. Have a great night.